can
Okay, can
see
you
it.
see it now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Thank you all for joining today because I know it's a Saturday, it's a precious time to be with family and relaxing. But thanks for joining this webinar. So we just want to talk about Cocotown. Cocotown is in the business of creating and empowering chocopreneurs through equipment, education, expertise, and exposure. So our mission is pioneering craft chocolate technology and our vision to be the one-stop shop for chocopreneurs and foodpreneurs so they can create award-winning chocolate and gourmet foods. So Concept started in 1992, that's our parent company, and we just started as a specialty kitchen equipment trading company. But then we always, focused on sustainability before it became the inward. But we have been doing this, but we wanted to be create the sustainability in cocoa farming, customers, businesses, and environment. The way we wanted to do is because when we started this business, Cocoa Town in 2009, 2005, we started selling machines for chocolate enthusiasts and people who were starting as to make as a hobby. But then in 2006, we introduced the commercial machines so they can actually start a business and grow their business. And then we saw the impact it's making. Then in 2009, we created the separate website, cocotown.com. So we can differentiate and we can focus more for the people who want to make chocolate. And then we also care about customers' businesses. So we want to make sure not just the equipment, but we also give them the education. And that's why, we create all this empowering chocopreneurs webinars and environment. Our machines are made with the stainless steel and high quality materials. And even after 20 years, they're still working. And then our Cocotown's pillars are equipment, education, exposure, the same thing that I told before. And then we have enabled and accelerated the bean to bar craft chocolate movement because we made it accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world. It's a low initial investment, minimal footprint, and basic knowledge or skills is needed. I can say that the low initial investment and the return on investment is big for us. And recently we saw a post by Dandelion Chocolate. They bought the first version of the Melanger long time ago. Is I think it was like 2008 or 2009, but now they're selling it for $500, are using it after those all these years. So it still holds the value. So say, when you are buying machines, you can look for value and also how it retains value and what's the return on the investment. And then we now know because of our machines, the farmers can add more value by selling semi-processed and fully processed products instead of selling beans as a commodity. And then we have price transparency and we have consistent pricing structure throughout the world. And we also offer financial assistance if anybody needs it. And the R&D is big for us. We are innovative, patented machines, and we are constantly improving the machines and coming up with new accessories, new machines. And even when we bring the new, improvements, they're compatible with the older models. It's not like you have to throw it and buy a new one. You can just add the new accessory or the new part to make it to the current standards. And now we have the machines and tools to match your journey and budget, whether you are starting as a hobbyist making half a kilo of chocolate, or if you are a company that's selling tons of chocolate. We have everything in between also. It's not just the micro batch and the macro batch, but we also have all the products in, for example, we have grinders or the melanges, what we call, we have 8 different sizes in between. And this is our, timeline. So 1992, we started the business, but it took 2 years to, figure out what to sell because we wanted to be innovative, just like our company name. So we introduced the Indian wet grinders in 1994, and then 2006 we introduced the Melanger, and then 2007 the commercial grinders, and then we registered Cocoa Town in 2009, and then Cocoa Tea Roaster, and then people liked our machines, and we started adding the roaster, cracker, winnower, and also we introduced the bean to bar workshop in 2014 because a lot of people didn't have the options like we have now. We didn't have the Google or Chat GPT or AI. So we had the workshops, and then we have complete line of machines in 2017, and we have applied the patents. And then we also started the Empowering Chocopreneurs webinar series in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. So we are always looking, resilient, and we are trying to be helping the community. And then I want to finish with Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings everywhere in the universe be happy and free, and may the thoughts, words, and actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to that freedom for all. Thank you for joining. I will let Teresa take over from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Balu. Welcome, everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Teresa Grant, and I work with the Cocoa Town on the Empowering Chocopreneurs webinars. And today we're excited to have Benjamin joining us. I've been looking forward to today's presentation. I'm tasked with a little bit of housekeeping, so I want to let you know that this session is being recorded today, and you will receive a link to view the recording at a later date. When you get the email with the link, there it will be a survey. If you could take just 1 minute to complete the survey, we greatly appreciate it. I also want to let you know that there'll be some time for a question and answer during the presentation, and then more time for a deeper dive at the end of the presentation. And I think that's all I have for housekeeping. So what I'd like to do real quick is just take a moment to have a quick conversation with Benjamin and ask you a question about Coco stories. So you tell Coco stories, and I like to hear. I know you focus on stories about the farmers, which I love, and I'm so excited to hear your presentation. But can you tell us a Coco story that is personal about you and your journey?
Well, I'm very excited to be here in the first place. And thank you, Teresa and Mrs. Balu, for bringing me to this webinar. Also welcome to all our listeners. It's very beautiful to meet people who are interested in the kind of work that I do, but also who are just interested in connecting with chocolates beyond the enjoyment of flavors, right? Um, one interesting story, a cocoa story that I experienced recently is one that happened, I think, well, not just recent, but I think in 2022. I traveled to Nigeria for a national cocoa festival called the Eco Chocolate Show. And one of the things that I was doing was presenting cocoa from Ghana to the plenary that was there. So it was an exhibition, and people would come around and then try to taste chocolate. One of the chocolates that we had was one that was made with cassava, and the cassava was sort of roasted and it was like a flour. So people would taste it and they were so excited because it was something that they could connect to. And for the first time, people were describing chocolate as something that was connecting them to events that had happened to them in the past, which I found very intriguing. And so that was something that was very remarkable for me in 2022. The fact that people could taste a bite of chocolate and then connect to stories from their past, the nostalgia of the past. That is something that is interesting.
Very nice. Well, thank you for that, Benjamin. And with that, I'm excited to turn the floor over to you, and let's go.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, so let me just go ahead and then share my screen with you. Right. Okay. Right.
Really quick, Benjamin, while you're doing that, I forgot to mention, if you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and put them in the chat so that you don't forget, and we'll be able to get to your questions during the break and at the end. Thank you.
Powerful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me just quickly slide into full screen mode. All right, show presenter view. Okay, wonderful. So we are welcome to bringing Cocoa to life, storytelling for Chocopreneurs. I would briefly tell you about myself, and then I'll go ahead into launching into what I have to present to the chocolate world today. So my name is Benjamin Seto Badago. I live in Ghana. I would briefly show you where I live in Ghana via photography. But For about 4 years now, I have been curious about the chocolate industry, more about not so much about not just about chocolate, but also about the people in the supply chains, right? And so that is something that I have been very passionate about. And I started African Cocoa Stories in 2022 with the purpose of telling stories about cocoa farmers. So my work basically in Ghana is to walk around and then interact with cocoa farmers, listen to their stories, talk to them, ask all kinds of questions, talk about anything in life at all that makes them excited or that makes them even sad, and then try to connect the world outside to the realities on the ground. And so my project mainly has been African cocoa stories. And my goal has just been to bridge the chocolate lovers of the world with the cocoa supply chain. And so my passion has mainly been how do we make the cocoa supply chain visible to the people outside? There's a problem that we need to fix, and then definitely I'm going to talk to you about that. But for now, that is just a little bit that I've talked to you. I can tell you about myself. So today's goal essentially is to inspire you to use stories. I see a typo there, but to inspire you to use stories from your supply chain to enrich your relationship with customers. So if you are a chocopreneur and you make chocolate, how can you use stories from your supply chain? What's opportunities that your supply chain offer you to connect further with your customers beyond the chocolate that you give to them? And the flow that we are going to use is to, first of all, I will introduce you to the cocoa growing world. I call it Cocoa Land. And then I'll pause for some questions and comments. Then we are going to proceed into exploring a problem with cocoa storytelling that I have observed since I started telling stories, and which even inspired me to start telling stories. And then I'll briefly talk about a shift that cocopreneurs can explore or can move into, and then some opportunities that they can take advantage of. And then we'll just take some questions and comment, but I'll be very, very particular about the comments from you. I would want to know your experience after you go through all the slides. So I would welcome you to Cocoa Land. It is where I grew up. It is where my life, almost all my life, minus 7 months in France and then 9 months in Togo, and then a week in Amsterdam have been. And it is something that I'm very passionate about. Although I didn't start early telling stories, I have been really curious about the world outside and also what the world thinks of my culture. And so that has already inspired many of the things that I do. So what is Cocoa Land? Cocoa Land essentially is where cocoa comes from. It is my simple term to describe, to summarize wherever cocoa comes from in the world, whether it is in Asia, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in South America, even if it is in a museum in Europe, I call it Cocoa Land because that is my shortcut to make it easier for me to connect with the world behind every chocolate bar. But this is a really zoomed in version of Cocoa Land. I've taken you like way too deep. So now I want to just pull you back a little bit so that we can gradually zoom in so that you can end up knowing exactly where I am, and then we can connect on the more on the ground. So I would like you to zoom out for now and then look at the world map, right? And this is something that everyone is familiar with. And you can see there are patches in green. And all these places are places that cocoa grows from in the world. But I can already see that there are some countries that I'm familiar with, like Malawi, which are not on the map. So beyond what you can see over here, there's cocoa growing in several parts of the world. And I summarize them all into Cocoa Land because there is one thing going through all of them. There's one thing that is familiar among all of them, and that is the fact that in all these regions, the cocoa crop or the cocoa plant can thrive. And while it can thrive, suddenly people are able to now develop a certain culture of producing it for the world to consume. So this is Cocoa Land. This is like a huge zoom out of Cocoa Land. Now let's zoom in a little bit. We cannot explore all of Cocoa Land at once. So let's zoom it a little bit and then see what we can find. So this is Africa. The African map is very familiar, I'm sure, with everyone. So there are several countries, about 54 countries. And on the top part, on the northern part, is more of the Sahara Desert. So it's more of the savanna, it's dry, it's more desertic. So cocoa cannot do well there. But if you look at the green part towards the southern side, you can see some greens, and that is where the potential of cocoa begins to increase. So that is Africa. Let's zoom it a little bit further, right? We cannot see much at this point. Let's zoom in a little bit further to see what we can find. Now we have West Africa, and I'm sure everybody in the cocoa industry is aware of West Africa. Everybody knows that a lot of cocoa comes from West Africa. About 70% of world's cocoa supply comes from West Africa, which is already an interesting thing for a continent that is not the originator of the cocoa crop, right? But that is an interesting discussion that I would want to have in a different space. But for now, West Africa, and it's one space where a lot of cocoa comes from. We are still not on the ground yet, so let's zoom in a little bit further to see what we can find. Let's narrow in on Ghana. So Ghana is the country in West Africa. It is where I am right now, although we have not zoomed in enough to exactly where I am. We will do that shortly. But Ghana is the second most highest producer of cocoa around the world. And just beside Ghana to the east, I think to the west, is Cote d'Ivoire, which is the biggest producer of cocoa, right? But today we're not going to talk about Cote d'Ivoire. In the future, I think we'll explore when I get there. But for now, let's zoom in a little bit more into Ghana to see where we'll be landing. So in Ghana, I'm bringing you to the eastern region because that is where I am positioned right now. That is where I live right now. And eastern region is towards of course, to the east of Ghana, but also to the eastern border, closer to the eastern border than all the other regions in Ghana. So there's eastern region where it is a lot of forests. There's a lot of big, well-known mountains. If you have heard of the Atiwa Mountain in Ghana, people fighting, advocating for it to be protected, that is in the eastern region is where part of it is. And in the eastern region, close to some of these mountains, is where I am currently positioned. But still, we don't have enough visuals, right? It's a lot of green. We can suggest like there's a lot of forest and all that. But let's dig in a little bit to see what we can find. Now we're at Asamankese. Asamankese is a town in the eastern region, and Asamankese happens to be the town where I reside right now. So you see, we have gone from the global level way down to a town where I am currently positioned. So if you want to find me anywhere in the world right now, it has to be this particular geographical position. Now, we still are not quite there yet, but I want you to show you something. All the browns that you see are either road networks or settlements. So the big settlement in the middle, that is Asamankese, of course, and then all the towns or smaller villages surrounding Asamankese, they are the ones whose names you can see over there. Now, the interesting thing that I would like you to notice that all the green that you can see are either forest lands or depending on how deep they are. The very deep ones are forest, but then the lighter deep ones are more of production of agriculture production. So there are farms. So people who live in all of the brown patches have farms surrounding the settlement, which is something that you would notice wherever you are in Ghana. Now let's zoom in. If you are walking around with me through Asamankese, and we ended up on a hill, this is a photo that you're about to see. This is how the town center looks like from afar. But I would like you to just come closer and then see what it is like to be on the ground. So your final landing. So this is your touchdown. On the street of Asamankese, there are so many things that you can see, just like everywhere in the world, right? You definitely see transportation moving around. You also just see pedestrians doing their own thing. Some kids walking around here and there. That is something that is very particular about any environment. So this is Asamankese, Ghana. So let's walk around a little bit. And so here you just have people engage into all kinds of activities. There's a bike rider moving across the street. There's a passenger vehicle. I know there's a passenger vehicle because it has a yellow number plate. So that is a fun fact you can learn about Ghana. Yellow number plate means a commercial passenger vehicle. And then there are people in the distance doing business under blue, yellow umbrellas. If you're walking towards my house, this is how the street looks like. you are likely to meet a farmer returning from farm or going to farm, and sometimes they will come back with firewood, depending on where they are going to. You also have the same situation with this woman over here, and here you are very close to my house. Now, you can also just walk around and then you meet kids returning from school in the afternoons. And that building you see over there, behind it is where I am living right now, and it's where I'm positioned right now. So you see, I brought you very close to where I am. And now, of course, a closer look at kids returning from school and then going to the house. So this older kid is likely not working with her sister. This child has been put in her custody so that she sort of takes care of her while they are in school, and then make sure that she comes home with her and then she's safe. So that is one of the things that parents do. When you are growing up, you can be put in child in relation with a child and then take them to school and then return. So we learn responsibility at a very young age. All I am doing right now has been setting the context in which the people that we are going to talk about today live. So if you're talking about cocoa farmers, imagine where they live. These are some of the environments in which they live. So this is a bigger town. There are smaller towns, there are small villages where cocoa farmers live in Ghana. But the focus for now has been where I live and then some of the people who live around me, the environment that they survive in. Now I've shown you my environment, I've shown you around, right? Now let me introduce you to certain farmers that I have met. Now I'll introduce you to Teresa Adai. Teresa Adai she lives right behind my house. Her house is just close to mine, and she's more of a mother to me because our interaction is always that of a son and then a mother. And she actually had her birthday just recently, so she's 17 now. We all met her at her house to celebrate her birthday. But what does she have to do with cocoa, and what does she have to do with you and the work that you do right now? Now, Teresa grows cocoa with her husband, but there was a time when she didn't know anything at all about farming because she didn't grow up in a farming community or she in a farming household. Her mother made palm oil, but it was not her place to go to the palm plantation to get palm. So she didn't learn farming at a very young age. But how did she transform suddenly to become somebody who now grows cocoa? Well, along the line, she met her husband, and her husband, Philip Adai, happens to be a pastor, but also a farmer. He grew up in a farming household. He learned to farm from his uncle. Along the line, he became a TV and radio repairer. It was his trade. It was what earned him money for his family. But then at a point, his family needed more money than he and his wife could afford. And so they had to now launch themselves into an extra money activity. And that was when the cocoa journey began because he remembered that when he was a child, when he was a young boy, his uncle trained him in the cultivation of the cocoa crop. And he had that skill within him, which was available at his disposal at the time when he needed to make extra income. So he launched into cocoa farming, and then eventually the two of them have been farming cocoa till now. All their children are old, they are taking care of themselves, but they do cocoa activities. And one of the things they tell me is that it keeps them active. Who else do we have around? Patrick is also a cocoa farmer, but also a mechanic. So he tells me that he was born into cocoa. And anytime a farmer says he was born into cocoa, what they are trying to tell me essentially is that they grew up in a cocoa growing household. Cocoa farming was always around them. And this idea is very prevalent when I talk to many cocoa farmers, and that thing has inspired a personal research that I'm doing, which is education of cocoa farmers. So he was born into a cocoa growing household. His grandfather trained him. His grandmother also trained him. And that is how he developed the skills to become a cocoa farmer. But after school, he went into apprenticeship as a mechanic and a blacksmith. And today, while he practices blacksmithing and mechanic job, he goes to take care of his 4-acre cocoa farm every now and then. So around this time, when it is raining, he already is in the village taking care of his cocoa farm instead of fixing the cars. Patrick. This is Paulina. and Paulina lives about 5 kilometers away from here. She grew up as the daughter of cocoa farmers. Her mother and father were all cocoa farmers, but her father was also a pastor and her mother was a trader. And so she grew up in the household of cocoa farmer trader and then cocoa farmer, cocoa farmer pastor. Now, Paulina grew up going to school like all the kids in her community, but at a point, she had that feeling that she couldn't keep up with the academics. At the same time, she was interested in learning trade. She was fascinated about the work that her mother did outside farming, which was trade. So she decided to go into trade. So she quit school and then followed her parents to the farm, helped them on the farm, but alongside decided to now practice trading. She started selling condiments, and today she's a farmer with about 10 acres total of cocoa farmland to her what do you call it as her own. But then she also always has something she's selling. And today she sells biscuits, she sells bags of water to the community around here. And Paulina's philosophy is that all her children must learn how to farm. Even if you grow to become the president, you must learn how to farm because nobody knows what is going to happen in the future. You can pursue being a lawyer and then end up not getting there. But the farming skill is something that you can always have at your disposal when you need it. As long as there's land, farming can happen. So all her kids have been taught to farm. I think that is a win for the cocoa industry because without people like Paulina teaching their kids how to farm, we wouldn't have more cocoa farmers in the world, right? Now we meet Salome, and Salome is about 80 years old now. She doesn't go to farm as many times as she would want to, but her story is also one of an interesting one that I'm happy to sort of have explored. She grew up in the eastern region, closer to where cocoa grew. Cocoa history began in Ghana, which is the Akuapem area. Her dad was an orange plantation owner. He wanted her to have amazing education, but she couldn't. She didn't want to. And so she was always being kicked out of, running away from school, not being kicked out. She was always running away from school. And that's pushed her father to sort of look for another avenue for her to make something out of life. So she was sent as to become an apprentice of a seamstress. And that is how she met her husband, who was a cocoa farmer. So she didn't know anything about farming, but by becoming the wife of a cocoa farmer, she became also a cocoa farmer. And that is one of the fascinating stories that I have always heard. Nana Ofori is a chief in his community, in the same community as Salome, the same community as Paulina. It's called Tupase, and it's about 5 kilometers away, as I said. He also grew up the son of a cocoa farmer. Eventually, he attended school, but he couldn't pursue it too far because of poverty. At the end of the day, he was able to become a laborer in the electricity company of Ghana in those days, in the early, I think, 50s. But later, he was able to use his curiosity and a knack for learning new things to become an engine room attendant. That was a skill that he developed, and then he was able to get training for. But in one of the military regimes in Ghana, it happened that cocoa farmers in Ghana, or this particular cocoa farmer, felt unsafe because once he was walking around, and then it happened that soldiers stopped him, thinking that he was a thief. He panicked, he was scared, and he was scared. But later, when he was let go, he swore never to go back to the work as electrician at the electricity company of Ghana again. So he returned, and then farming has been his life. Finally, this is Texan. Texan Ajogule is my own friend. He started his cocoa farm at the time when I was going full blast into cocoa storytelling. And that is how I met him. He grew up the son of a cocoa farmer and the son of a blacksmith. His mother had him on his back while she was planting cocoa for the first time. And along the line, she never expected that he was going to become a cocoa farmer. But today, Texan has his Bachelor of Education. He's a teacher. And now he wants to go into cocoa farming as another source of income in order to support his family. So these are some of the stories that I have met so far, the people that I have interacted with on the ground. And I'm happy to take any contextual questions that anybody might might have before we delve into storytelling and then the state of it in the cocoa industry. Over to you, Teresa.
Wow, Benjamin, I'm sort of basking in the enjoyment of getting to learn about the everyday life and the beautiful faces, and so grateful for hearing about Paulina, who's passing on the tradition to her children, and seeing Turkson, the youngest person on the
Yes,
on the list. We need that.
definitely.
Yes.
I'm
Okay.
wondering if I'm wondering if anyone has any questions, context to explore, and then
Yes,
I'll delve into that.
yeah, let's see. So Sharon says, beautiful photos and such great stories already. I'm really enjoying this presentation. Do you take all the photos yourself? And how did you get training for capturing their personality?
That is a powerful question. That is a really amazing question, and I'm excited to hear. So the first one, do I capture the photos myself? And then how do I get training? Okay. So first of all, yes, I capture every single photo that you have seen here myself, minus the satellite photos. Those are from Google Earth. So those are not my photos, right? So all the human photos, I capture them myself. And I didn't train professionally to become a photographer. I ever since I had my first smartphone, I have always walked around taking photos of things that I was passionate about. And I think I had like like a huge stock of photos from about 2015 when I had my first smartphone until now. Unfortunately, after my Salon du Chocolat event in Paris, I lost my bag, and so 2 terabytes of photos were gone, right? But the idea is that I just take photos when I feel like. So when I feel like there's something to capture, I just capture them. And so when I'm talking to the farmers, I either have like my big camera in hand or I have my smartphone in hand. And you can see that there's a roof attached to the smartphone. So it is always like this, right? So while I'm talking to them, I take the photos and then I come back and I examine them to see what I can get out of it. So I have just been training by taking photos all the time. That is how I'm able to capture their personalities. Yeah. So always it's just a feeling that comes that I want to capture this and then I capture it. I don't think I just capture and then later I find out that they are interesting things to share. So I'm happy that you like the channel.
Beautiful. Okay, we have another question. Let's see. Are there any best practices, documentation between farmers' knowledge that we can learn?
Okay. Best practice documentation between farmers' knowledge that we can learn. Oh, okay, yes. So that is one thing that I am beginning to explore. Knowledge that farmers have versus what is in theory or what is practiced as far as general scientific knowledge is concerned. But after interacting with farmers on the ground, sometimes the experiences that they have with their own farms tends to be a bit different from what people talk about in the world. So farming practices like organic farming and some of the things that are in mode now, people are sort of advocating for right now. They have been the way of farming for a very long time. So over here, organic farming was conventional, right? Until later, when the Green Revolution and all these kind of things began, that chemicals began to come back into the system. But there have met several farmers who never took part in the Green Revolution. They just decided to refuse to apply pesticides to their farm. And they have been just weeding with their machete since then because they didn't like introducing chemicals. It didn't make sense for them to introduce chemicals into their farming activity. So they just stayed away, and that is where they are right now. So yes, there's a lot of interesting things that I am exploring as far as education of farmers is concerned, the indigenous knowledge system is concerned. And I think in the future I'll be able to have something concrete that we can talk about.
Okay, very good. So
Okay.
just two more questions and then we'll get back to the very insightful presentation.
Sure.
So let's see. How do you handle consent is one of the questions.
Okay.
to share the stories and the photos.
Okay. So one of the things that I do is that my photo storing is not like a drive-by storytelling. So I don't go to meet a farmer just once and then tell their story and then never see them again. Every single person that you've seen in this photo is someone that I have an ongoing relationship with. Right? So I am not just a stranger who meets them and tell their story, but I live with them and then they know exactly what I'm doing. So before I tell them that, before I start taking photos of them, we have a conversation. I let them know that this is the work that I'm doing. There are people outside in the world who consume cocoa products, but they don't know about farmers. They are curious to learn, but they don't know. And so your story or your photo will enable me to share some of these stories with them so that they can see how things run. They can also learn from your experience. And many of them are just happy to allow me to take photos of them. And then when I'm taking photos for them, what they tell me that I'm going abroad. The idea is that they may never go to the US, but their photo is going to the US. So they are going abroad. And that is an interesting experience that I have. So I take photos and then put out the photos of people I am in direct relationship with and people who are fully aware of the work that I do. Yeah.
Very
I
good.
have a question, Benjamin. Yes, you are talking about the theory is different than practical because unfortunately the scientific theories are formulated on the average of what everything, but whereas the farmer knowledge is specific to that particular land, that particular crop for generations. So that
Exactly.
needs to be, you know, chronicled because
Yeah.
unfortunately in between the farmers, the children of the farmers, they left the like to the
Yeah.
left the village to go to the cities to earn money,
Yeah.
and we lost some of their knowledge because it was
Yeah.
in their mind, it was
Yes.
transferred from generation to generation,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody chronicled it in
No.
written form or
Yeah.
oral form. So
Yeah.
you are
Yeah.
doing a good job of for the future generations going to be more very very valuable
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we can study in the university, but the thing is unfortunately that doesn't talk about specific soil or a specific water
No.
condition or the very like called the micro or like a customized
Mm-hmm.
farming. So
Exactly.
I think
Exactly.
that what you're doing is great. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate it. And I really love the fact that you talk about how scientific knowledge sort of captures the generality, the general of or the average of everything, and then offers a solution. And what I often say is that if you look at the average of a problem, your solution can only be average. You can only have an improper solution. You can only have an average solution. And many farmers know their farms, and sometimes they just don't even listen to the extension officers who come around because what they know about their farm is so different from what the extension officers who come every now and then are proposing. So thank you so much for that. Tess.
Yes, that's actually a great lead into the last question before we move on, which is do they have government or European Union training promoting cocoa production in rural communities in Ghana?
Okay. So here's one thing that we should know that for as long as Ghana has produced cocoa, the transfer of knowledge of cocoa farmers has not been an education from outside. Cocoa farmers have passed on their knowledge from one generation to the other, as Mrs. Barlow was saying, until today. So the human resource pipeline of cocoa farming or cocoa production in the world has been something that has been traditional all the while. And nobody goes to school at a young age to go and learn cocoa farming. No, we learn about agriculture in school, but cocoa production is not learned in school. So mainly farmers are training themselves to do the farming. What we have as cocoa board, who is in charge of ensuring that the quality control of cocoa production in the world is to provide farmers with assistance from the Cocoa Health and Extension Division of Cocoa Board, where they send out extension officers to pair them up or yes, connect them to farmers. And then they sort of monitor the farmers' farm. And if there's any intervention that they can sort of suggest for farmers to improve their agriculture, they are able to do that in order to increase production. And I also know that there are many trainings that are organized as far as disease control, pest control, and all those things are done. So yes, There are all kinds of trainings, but basically the core of cocoa farming, which is the farming activity itself, that training has been passed on from generation to generation traditionally. So now it is just being supported by cocoa board education schemes across the country. Yeah.
Right, very good. With that, we will continue with the presentation.
Okay. So thank you so much for engaging, and in continuing, since I began my storytelling, I identified a problem, and that problem is the premise on which my journey as a supply chain storyteller, mainly focused on cocoa for now, is based. So how did it happen? Is my screen still visible?
Yes.
Okay. So now we have a problem. And the problem is that chocolate lovers are disconnected from cocoa land, or they are disconnected from cocoa origins. And the idea for me is that for as long as cocoa has existed, for as long as industrial cocoa production and then industrial chocolate production has existed, I feel like the more people consume chocolate, their knowledge about the origins of cocoa should have increased. But I still feel that that hasn't happened so much, or people are still oblivious of some of the things that happened in the cocoa supply chain. How did it happen? Well, the cocoa supply chain was not designed to move stories. It was designed to move cocoa. And so the job of all the logistics activities in the cocoa supply chain is to ensure that once cocoa has been produced in Ghana, in Asamankese where I live, they facilitate its movement from all the way Asamankese to Accra to Tema, across the ocean to somewhere in Madison, Wisconsin. That is the job of the supply chain. And so the story of farmers, it was never something that was interesting for somebody to know about cocoa farming. There was nothing that's really prompted the need for cocoa stories, because people just wanted to eat chocolate. But along the line, ethical concerns brought about labor and fair pricing has resulted in a push for transparency and traceability. And so suddenly people are now concerned about what is in their food, what is in their supply chain, whether they are buying chocolate from somebody who is taking care of cocoa farmers well, or somebody who is cheating, or somebody who is abusing people. And suddenly people want to know what happens in the cocoa supply chain in order to make a choice about which chocolate bar to consume. And I'm sure this is something that everybody is aware of. So this has resulted in the push for transparency, traceability, and all the things that would enable people to really trust that the brands they are consuming are coming from places where people are taking good care of, or environments are not being hurt in order to just produce cocoa. So suddenly people want to know who is in their supply chain and what happens in their supply chain. But in response, the farthest brands have gone, the farthest chocolate and cocoa brands have gone, has mostly been used, has mostly been using cocoa farmers' stories to show their ethicality, but not connect consumers to the context and cultures of their cocoa origins. And so it is easy for everyone to go on social media and then see that brands are talking about how they are paying cocoa farmers better, how they are sponsoring, or advocating for extra income making activities so that farmers can be lifted out of poverty. Brands also talk about all the kinds of support they are giving to children in the communities to avoid child labor. You realize that anytime the story of cocoa farmers appear online, it is one thing, brands using these stories, or brands telling them, their customers, about how they are being ethical about their supply chains. The gap here then for me has been that cocoa farmers are not being presented beyond the fact that they are beneficiaries of CSR, or corporate social responsibility. So anytime the cocoa farmers face showed up, mostly, I'm not generalizing, mostly it is always to enhance the brand's ethicality, which for me is just a really narrow exploration of what the full potential of cocoa farmers stories. And so in 2022, 2021, when I was working with Dr. Christy Leslie, I'm sure many of you know her, Doc of Chalk. that was the conversation that we were having, that many people were disconnected from the realities of cocoa producers. They didn't appreciate the culture well. There were many assumptions, many perceptions about labor abuse, about child labor and all that, and that really lacked context. But the brands that were the connections between the cocoa farmers and then these consumers were only telling stories to assure them that, oh, there's nothing wrong in our supply chain, but not really connecting the consumers to what is happening in the supply chain or the realities on the ground, as I like to call it. And so my storytelling, as you have seen earlier, you haven't even seen cocoa. I'm not sure there were any cocoa trees in the stories that I showed you, but these were cocoa farmers in contexts that were different than what everybody knows them for. And that is the journey that I am on right now, to showcase cocoa farmers beyond what the industry has always portrayed them to be. And so consumers have been disconnected from the origin stories, the origin cultures, the origin farmers. And at this point where internet is abundant and it's easy to get information, we have no excuse to make that connection happen. And I think craft chocolate makers or chocopreneurs in the bean to bar space or any of the fine flavor spaces have the huge opportunity to explore this and make this happen. Now let's talk about the shift. So instead of compliance, instead of using storytelling to show compliance, instead of, for example, Benjamin Chocolate Company using the stories of cocoa farmers to show that our supply chain is clean, there's no deforestation, there's no child labor, Benjamin Chocolate Company wants to use stories of farmers to bring their supply chain to life so that their brand, their patronizers, their consumers, their customers can now see for themselves what is happening in there, can now relate to the people in the supply chain, and for build a more meaningful relationship with them instead of people who just come to show that my company is ethical. And so the whole point for me here, or the shift that we can explore here, is that storytelling can humanize the cocoa supply chain and build empathy. So storytelling is not just there to serve as a means for brands to show their ethicality, but to connect people to the cocoa supply chain and build empathy, build connection, bring out the humanity in the cocoa supply chain so that somebody far away can now feel like there's something they have in common with the cocoa farmer. And I will show you something of the sort shortly. So yes, beyond proving compliance and ethicality, I want us to begin to think about using stories to connect consumers to the supply chain so that they can now feel it instead of just be assured by a certification stamp. I have a quote. Patty Dick says, the shortest distance between two people is a story. And I will illustrate that. I heard this quote and then later, just a month later, I had a full experience of it. So I was booked to tell a story at Class and Quality Chocolates. They are based in Madison, Wisconsin. And we did a virtual fireside where I tell stories about cocoa farmers. I had spent about 12 days documenting stories of Teresa and then her husband, Philip. And so I presented the story. And one of the things that I did was this. There was a moment in the story where there was cocoa on the mat, drying. And at the same time, because Teresa's grandchildren had come to visit, they were also around, and then she needed to take care of them. So she would go to tend to the cocoa on the dry mat, and then she'll come back, and then she'll do laundry. And laundry over here is washing with the hand. That's what everybody, like 99% of people here do. We wash with the hand. And so she'll alternate between taking care of the cocoa, sorting out bad bits and throwing them away, and then washing so that the kids can have their clothes clean. And while she was working, all the kids were also just playing around, jumping around, asking her all kinds of questions, just like all kids have. And then after the presentation, I asked questions. So I did a survey and then they sent me some responses. And one of the questions was, what was your highlight of the event? And somebody said this: I liked seeing the journey of the cocoa bean through a story instead of a process. I also enjoyed hearing the pastor's wife's perspective throughout the story. She forgot her name, but the story also always stuck, which is a very interesting thing. She seems funny and joyful. But here's the part that I found very interesting. She said, finally, I enjoyed seeing the other things the cocoa farmers do in their day to day. We also have balance. We also have balance, have to balance work and then laundry and kids. And liked that we have those things in common. It brought humanity to the supply chain. And this is the perfect comment that I have to illustrate what we are talking about here. So if you're a chocopreneur and you make chocolate or whatever you do in the supply chain, if there's that part where you have an advantage, the idea here is that it is possible to use stories to connect, to make your product more meaningful than the product itself. So if all you serve is chocolate, then you can bring stories to make it more interesting. And I'm going to get to that a little bit. So this example is a testament to the fact that stories are more powerful than just using them to show compliance or to show ethicality. Stories can now help you deepen your relationship with the consumers of your product. So that is the shift that I'm calling for. Move from using stories as compliance tools or as assurance tools to using stories to now connect deeply with your with your consumers, such that at the end of the day, when more people consume your product, they develop a richer, deeper appreciation of the people behind the chocolate bar. The opportunity here is that chocopreneurs are uniquely positioned to lead a change. Why do I say that? You see, you guys are interested in chocolate as a tool for connection. You don't just produce cocoa for chocolates for people to just go and buy mindlessly and consume, but you want people to be thinking of the origin when they taste the chocolate. You want the flavor to tell a particular story. And so what you are doing is that you are making inclusions, you are using flavor, you are using ingredients to tell stories so that somebody in Atlanta, Georgia, can appreciate the taste of Ghana, for instance. That is the business that you are in. And I think that is like the best opportunity or the most viable space for storytelling in supply chain to happen, because then the consumer now has access to somebody who already is interested in telling stories about the people in their supply chains. And so telling stories about the people in your supply chain can make that connection happen. What you have done with chocolate making is amazing. But oftentimes I've heard challenges in the industry where people are complaining that people don't want to pay higher prices for craft chocolate, although there's a lot more quality and a lot more verticality in there than other types of chocolate. But the reality is that people cannot subscribe to paying higher prices for craft chocolates if they don't feel the connection that you want them to feel, if you don't feel a deeper meaning beyond the flavor that you give them. And one of the ways that you can open a door to something richer, something deeper, something more interesting than the product you give them is to tell stories about the people in their supply chain. And by the people in their supply chain, farmers are included. I've focused so much on farmers, but they're not just farmers alone. There are farmers included. There are some people who don't farm, but they're also part of the supply chain. There are purchasing clerks. There are people who just carry the load from farm to the house, and that is all they do. All these people are part. There's somebody driving a truck across from one city to another in order to put cocoa in the warehouse on time. Somebody is ensuring that the cocoa in the warehouse is taken good care of and then it doesn't get moldy. All these people are amazing people who enhance the chocolate that you are making. In fact, their work precedes yours, and yours is a continuation of their work. And so while you can tell stories about how you make chocolate in your workshop or in your manufacturing space, you can also tell the story of the people whose amazing work preceded the work that you are doing. And I think you can only just make your chocolate so interesting, so amazing, so meaningful to the people who want to develop more meaning beyond the product that they consume. And so that said, this is my inspiration to you. I would just encourage everyone on this space to start thinking, to start reflecting on what is in our supply chain, who is in our supply chain, what are their stories. And if I knew about their stories, would it inspire me to make something more interesting than what I have? if I share it with my consumers, would they find more meaning in my product? I'm not here to give you tactics. I'm not here to give you like cheat codes. I'm here to inspire you to sort of think in a particular direction, start a conversation that we can all participate in on over time, and then strategies are going to come up, opportunities are going to come up, and then everything is going to be very interesting for everyone to learn more about. So I really appreciate your time. I'm going to pause here and I'll invite more questions and then more comments. First of all, tell me, does this make sense at all? Is this something interesting? Or Benjamin, no, this idea is not going to work. I'm really curious about hearing that. So over to you, Teresa. I'm going to pause here now. And quickly, before Teresa comes in, I have a Substack newsletter where you can just subscribe. You can just subscribe and then follow my work anytime. So that the QR code is going to be on there, and then you can always connect to. So Teresa, over to you.